I'm 70 years old, and today my only son hit me in the face because I asked his wife not to smoke next to me. He called me a stinking old man and told me to shut up. She just laughed and said it was about time someone put me in my place. I fell, my glasses shattered, and as I picked up the shards from the floor with trembling hands, I realized something very simple. For 15 years, I endured humiliations because I thought that's what you called family. For 15 years, I kept quiet about what I actually had. For 15 years, my son didn't even suspect what I really possessed or who had acted as a true father to him all that time. But 15 minutes after that blow, I made a phone call, and everything changed forever. My son was convinced I was a helpless old man hanging around his neck. He was wrong. The kitchen smelled like homemade broth and fried steaks because I, Arthur Miller, had been cooking since early morning, just as I had every day for the past 15 years. I was standing at the sink, washing dishes and looking out the window at the November yard in Chicago, where the wind was dragging the last yellow leaves across the wet asphalt. I was thinking that winter would be here soon and it would be time to pull the heavy coats down from the top of the closet. The water was very hot, almost scalding, but I liked it that way because the heat calmed my old hands, which had been aching more and more at night lately. Behind my back, I heard the flick of a lighter, and I smelled the cigarette smoke even before I turned around. Carrie, my daughter-in-law, was sitting at the kitchen table with one leg crossed over the other, smoking and flicking ash directly into her half-finished mug of coffee. She was 41 and had a cold beauty, the kind that doesn't warm you but cuts you. She had never tried to hide how she felt about her father-in-law. To her, I was like a piece of old furniture, something outdated and useless that should have been kicked to the curb a long time ago. I felt my chest tighten. Asthma had been haunting me for 15 years, ever since the death of Sarah, my wife. The doctors told me it was partly psychosomatic, that sometimes grief settles in your lungs and won't let you breathe. I pulled my inhaler out of my sweatpants pocket, showed it to Carrie, and spoke in the softest voice I could, trying not to sound demanding or accusatory. Carrie, please, could you smoke on the porch? I have asthma. It's really hard for me to breathe when people smoke nearby. I'm not demanding anything, I'm just asking. Carrie didn't even turn her head toward me. She took a deeper drag, exhaled the smoke toward the ceiling, and replied with that special tone of absolute contempt I'd been hearing for years. This is my kitchen too, Artie. If you don't like it, you go out. I wanted to answer. I wanted to remind her that wasn't exactly true, that legally, this house and the suburbs and everything in it belonged to me. But I stayed quiet, like I always did. I turned back to the sink and kept washing dishes, trying to breathe shallowly so I wouldn't cough, trying to be invisible. At that moment, David walked into the kitchen, my son, my only son, my flesh and blood, the boy I had raised, educated, and set on his feet. David was 44, working as a project manager at a construction firm, and lately, he reminded me more and more of someone carrying a massive weight on his shoulders but refusing to admit it existed. That morning, David had already woken up in a foul mood. There were problems at the site. The boss was breathing down his neck. Carrie was demanding a new Tesla, and life in general felt deeply unfair to him. David caught the last of my words and stopped in the doorway. His face contorted with a gesture I knew all too well, that flicker of irritation that so easily turned into rage. "Are you at it again?" David asked, his voice so full of venom that I instinctively hunched my shoulders. "Always the asthma drama. Every single day. Carrie has every right to smoke in her own home." "Son, I only asked her to," I started, but I didn't get to finish the sentence. Something snapped inside David like a blown fuse. He took a step toward me, his face twisted. I saw it happen in slow motion, my son's hand rising, his fist clenching, the blow coming. I didn't have time to move or raise my hands to protect myself. "Shut up. You smell worse than the cigarettes. Do you realize how sick we all are of you?" The punch hit my cheek with a dry, brutal force. I was thrown backward, my hip slamming against the edge of the granite countertop before I hit the floor. My glasses flew off, hit the leg of the table, and the lenses shattered on the tiles with a soft clink. The pain in my face was sharp and intense, but even more piercing was another pain, the one that stabbed deeper, right where the heart is supposed to be. Carrie didn't just smile, she laughed. She actually threw her head back and said with evident pleasure, "It was about time someone put you in your place. How long were we supposed to put up with your whining?" I lay on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling. I was 70 years old. I had raised this boy who was now standing over me with clenched fists. I had stayed up through the nights when he was sick as a child. I had worked 2 jobs to put him through University of Illinois. I had sold my cabin in Wisconsin just to help him with the down payment on his first car. And now that boy, my son, my blood, was standing there without even thinking of offering a hand to help me up. David was breathing heavily, and slowly, a realization of what he had just done began to show on his face. But instead of regret, something else appeared, something like self-justification. He was telling himself he was right, that it was my fault, that I had pushed him to the limit with my eternal victimhood. "Get up," David growled, turning away. "Stop the act." I sat up slowly. Then I stood up just as slowly. My knees were shaking, but I forced myself to stand tall. I leaned down and started picking up the pieces of my glasses, placing them carefully in my palm as if they were something valuable, something that could still be fixed. Carrie stubbed out her cigarette in her coffee mug, got up from her chair, and said with a smirk, "Come on, Dave, let him clean up. At least he's useful for something." They left the kitchen, and I was alone. I stood motionless for a few seconds, holding the broken glass in my hand, staring at the door through which my son and daughter-in-law had disappeared. Something changed inside me at that moment. Something shifted and clicked into place. I had been enduring this for 15 years, convincing myself it was normal, that all families had problems, that my son was just tired from work, that Carrie simply didn't understand. For 15 years, I had lied to myself. But now, standing in that kitchen with a swollen face and shattered glasses, I finally saw the truth. This wasn't a family, it never had been. It was something else, something ugly and cruel that I only called a family because I was terrified of being alone. I went to my room, a tiny space at the end of the hall they had assigned to me when I moved in after Sarah's death. It was the smallest room in the house, a former walk-in closet they had barely converted into a bedroom. It fit a twin bed, an old dresser, and a nightstand with a lamp. On the wall hung a single photo of Sarah, my late wife, looking at me with a soft smile as if she wanted to tell me something important. I sat on the bed and just stayed there, staring at the wall. I could feel my cheek throbbing and the bruise forming. Tomorrow everyone will see, I thought distantly. The neighbors would see, they would ask. I'd have to lie and say I fell, as usual. Then I remembered something, a business card I had received 3 months ago from a young attorney who had come to the neighborhood for an estate matter with the neighbors. That lawyer, a serious woman in her late 30s, had stayed and talked to me a little longer than necessary. And I, without knowing why, told her more than I should have. I told her about my son, who went weeks without speaking to me, about my daughter-in-law, who told me I was a burden, about how I felt like a stranger in my own home. The attorney listened intently and gave me her card. "If you ever want to get your papers in order, call me," she said. "Sometimes organizing your documents helps organize your life." I pulled that card out of the nightstand drawer where it had been for months and looked at it with my nearsighted eyes. Without my glasses, the letters were blurry, but I already knew the number by heart. I had spent weeks looking at it every night before bed, thinking that one day I would call. That day had arrived. I pulled out my old flip phone, the one David called a museum piece and constantly told me to throw away, and dialed the number. The ringtone seemed too loud in the silence of the room. "Rivers and Associates, good morning," a female voice answered on the other end. "Good morning," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, serene and firm, as if it belonged to someone else. This is Arthur Miller. You gave me your card 3 months ago. Do you remember? There was a brief pause, and the tone on the other end became warmer. Of course I remember, Mr. Miller. Are you ready? I looked at Sarah's photo on the wall. She was still smiling at me, and it seemed to me that she nodded. Yes, I replied. I'm ready. Could you come today? Right now, if possible. I gave her the address, which she already knew, and hung up. Then I leaned back on the pillow and closed my eyes. My heart was beating too fast, and I felt a pressure in my chest, but it wasn't the asthma, it was something else, something very much like the feeling of liberation. For the first time in 15 years, I felt that my life was in my own hands. I sat on the bed for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the house. From the living room, I could hear David and Carrie's voices. They were watching TV, arguing about something, and laughing. They had already forgotten what happened in the kitchen. To them, it was just another episode, a meaningless scene. They didn't know that this episode had changed everything. I got up from the bed and went to the closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of old sweaters, sat a shoebox. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were documents, a pile of papers I had kept for years, showing them to no one. Property titles, lease agreements, bank statements, the history of my real life, the part my son didn't even suspect existed. I spread the papers on the bed and began checking them, making sure everything was in order. The deed to this very house in the Chicago suburbs, where we were now, was in my name. I had never transferred it to David, though I had promised to do so years ago. Something had held me back, some inner voice whispering, "Wait, Arthur, don't rush. First, see what kind of man your son becomes." Now I saw it clearly. Besides this house, there were deeds to 2 other condos downtown that I had been renting out through an agency for years. The rent went into an account in my name, an account David knew nothing about. He didn't know because he never asked. He was never interested in how his father lived, whether he had money, or if he needed help. David was convinced I was scraping by on a meager Social Security check and was completely dependent on him. This belief made him arrogant and cruel because he thought I had nowhere else to go. Poor old man, without a dime in his pocket, where's he going to go? That's what David thought. He was wrong. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced my chest, and I clutched my heart. It was a fierce, stabbing pain, unlike anything I had felt before. I tried to inhale, but the air wouldn't reach my lungs. Dark spots danced before my eyes, and I realized I was falling, but I couldn't do anything to stop it. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Sarah's face in the photograph. She was still smiling. The crash of the fall echoed through the house. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, David's irritated voice came from the living room. What was that now? He dropped something again. Carrie burst out laughing. Probably finally tripped over his own feet. Ignore it, he'll figure it out himself. But the sound didn't repeat, and not a rustle came from the room. David waited another minute and reluctantly got up from the couch. I'll go check, he grumbled. Hope he didn't break anything valuable. He walked down the hallway, pushed the door open, and saw me on the floor, unconscious. Documents were scattered around, and my face was frozen in a strange expression, a mix of pain and relief. David's first reaction was annoyance. More drama, he thought. Another play for attention. But then he noticed my chest was barely moving, and something cold stirred inside him. Dad? He called tentatively. Dad, what's wrong? There was no answer. David froze in the doorway. Somewhere deep inside, a feeling that had slept for years woke up. Fear. He forced himself to take one step forward, then another, and knelt beside me. His hands were shaking as he touched my shoulder. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice now hoarse. "Dad, can you hear me? Open your eyes." I didn't react. David pressed 2 fingers to my neck, trying to find a pulse like he'd seen in movies, but he couldn't tell if he was feeling my heart or his own, which was thumping in his ears. "Call 911. He barked at Carrie, who stood frozen in the doorway. "What are you standing there for? Fast!" Carrie flinched at his tone, snatched her phone, and started dialing. While they waited for the paramedics, David sat on the floor and, for the first time in years, truly looked at me. I had aged so much in these 15 years. My hair was almost white, my wrinkles deep, my hands covered in age spots. When did he get so old? David thought. When did this tall, strong man who used to carry me on his shoulders through Grant Park turn into this fragile old man? His gaze fell on the papers scattered nearby, and he almost reached for them, but at that moment, the sound of a siren and a knock at the door rang out. "It's the ambulance," Carrie said and ran to open it. David quickly jumped up and, with an instinctive motion, kicked several documents under the bed. He didn't even know why he was doing it. An impulse told him these papers had to stay hidden from prying eyes. 2 paramedics entered the room, a young man with a defibrillator and a woman in her 50s with a tired but attentive face. The woman immediately knelt beside me. "Possible heart attack," she told her colleague a minute later. "Blood pressure is dropping. Let's get an EKG." David stood pressed against the wall, feeling like an intruder in this tiny closet of a room. Carrie stayed in the hallway. He could hear her already calling someone, likely a friend, recounting the events. Suddenly, the doctor looked up and stared directly at him. "Your father?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Arthur Miller, 70. He has asthma, uses an inhaler." The doctor nodded but continued to stare intently at him, then moved her gaze to the massive bruise on my cheek. David felt his mouth go dry. He fell, he choked out the first thing that came to mind. Must have lost his coordination when he started feeling sick and hit something. "I found him like this." The doctor said nothing, but something changed in her eyes. She leaned over me again. At that moment, I groaned and opened my eyes. My vision was blurry. I didn't know where I was. I tried to sit up, but the doctor gently held me down. "Stay still, Mr. Miller. You lost consciousness. We're from emergency services." I blinked several times, and my vision began to clear. I saw the doctor, the man with the equipment, and finally, David. When our eyes met, I didn't look away. I looked at him directly and calmly, and there was something new in that look, something David had never seen before. "How are you feeling?" the doctor asked. "Can you tell me what happened?" I paused for a few seconds, weighing my answer. "My heart gave out," I said finally. "I got upset and fell." The doctor leaned in closer and lowered her voice, though David heard every word. "Mr. Miller, that bruise on your cheek isn't from a fall. I've been in EMS for 30 years, and I know exactly what a punch looks like. Did someone hit you?" The silence became almost tangible. David felt his heart pounding in his throat. He wanted to run, to vanish through the floor. I looked at my son for a long time. Then I turned back to the doctor. "I fell," I repeated quietly but firmly. "I tripped over the threshold and hit the edge of the nightstand." The doctor held my gaze for a few more seconds. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." David exhaled, not even realizing he had been holding his breath. I had just covered for him. The very father he had punched in the face 15 minutes ago had lied to protect him. He should have felt gratitude, but instead, he felt a strange mix of shame and irritation, as if he had been exposed by my very mercy. The doctor took out a business card and placed it on the nightstand. "This is my personal number," she told me. "My name is Sophia Morales. If you need help, any kind of help, call me. I'm serious." I looked at the card, then at her, and gave a weak smile. "Thank you, Sophia. I'll call." The next half hour was filled with medical procedures. They gave me pills under my tongue and stabilized my condition. Eventually, the doctor announced that hospitalization wasn't mandatory, but I needed absolute rest for at least a week, followed by a visit to a cardiologist. "Is there someone to look after him?" she asked, looking at David. "Of course," he answered too quickly. "We live here with my wife." The doctor measured him again with that same appraising look. "Good. Total rest. No excitement, no stress." She emphasized those last words so clearly that even David got the hint. When the medics left, silence fell over the house. Carrie peeked into the room. "So, is he going to make it?" she asked with a smirk. And here I thought it was time to plan a funeral. David flinched as if he'd been struck. "Shut up," he snapped. "Just shut up, Carrie." She raised her eyebrows in surprise but said nothing and went back to the living room. David remained standing in the hallway. He felt like he should go in and talk to me, say something, maybe even apologize. But what could he say? "I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I called you a stinking old man." The words stuck in his throat. In the end, he turned around and went back to the TV, to that comfortable life where one doesn't have to think or ask for forgiveness. I lay in bed, listening to their retreating footsteps. I wasn't surprised he didn't come in. It didn't hurt. 15 years had been enough to learn not to expect love or even basic respect from my son. I turned my head toward the table. Next to the doctor's card lay another, the card of attorney Gabriella Rivers. I remembered that I had managed to call her before I passed out. She said she would come as soon as possible. She was likely already on her way. I slowly pulled myself up, overcoming my weakness. The documents David had tried to hide under the bed, I carefully retrieved. Everything was there. The deed to this house, the papers for the downtown condos, the bank account. My entire real life remained untouched. I looked at the photo of Sarah. "I should have done this a long time ago," I whispered. "You always said I was too soft, that David was walking all over me." "You were right." Sarah smiled at me from the photo, and I thought I saw approval in her eyes. Voices drifted in from the living room. Carrie was demanding something again. David was snapping back. The tone was familiar. Complaints, reproaches, demands. She had been demanding something since the day she entered our family. I remembered how David, then a 20-year-old college grad, had brought her home, a beautiful girl with a cold gaze. Sarah had seen through her instantly. "That girl will be trouble for our family," she said then. I didn't listen. I believed a son's feelings were sacred. Now I understood how right Sarah was, except for one thing: the trouble wasn't just Carrie, the trouble was what my son had become under her influence. The doorbell rang. I heard David go to answer it. Voices in the foyer, surprised, tense. Then footsteps down the hall. "Dad," David's voice from the doorway was confused. "There are people here to see you. A lawyer and an assistant. They say you called them." I tucked the documents into a folder, stood up, and straightened my clothes. My legs were shaking a bit, but I forced myself to stand straight. It was important to show strength. "Let them in," I replied. "And you come in too, David. This concerns you most of all." Gabriella Rivers was exactly as I remembered her. A tall woman in a flawless navy blue suit, with observant gray eyes that seemed to see right through people. Behind her followed a young man with a leather briefcase. "Mr. Miller," she greeted, quickly assessing the state of my tiny room. "I came as soon as I could. You said it was urgent." "It is," I replied, gesturing toward the only chair. "Please, sit. This will be a long conversation." David stood in the doorway, glancing back and forth between me and the lawyer. He was completely bewildered. For the last 15 years, he had grown used to me being predictable, like an old clock. "Dad, what's going on?" He tried to make his voice sound firm. "Why do you need a lawyer? You almost just died." I looked at him. In my gaze, there was no rage, no resentment, only the infinite weariness of a man who had carried a heavy burden for too long and finally decided to drop it. "Exactly because of that, son," I replied. "Because I almost died." It made me realize. Life can end at any moment, and I want to get my affairs in order. "Come in and listen. You'll find this interesting." David slowly walked in and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest, a posture meant to show confidence, but it only betrayed his nervousness. Carrie appeared behind him, craned her neck with curiosity. "You come in too, Carrie," I invited. "This concerns you both." The lawyer opened her folder. "Mr. Miller, 3 months ago you expressed a desire to organize your assets," Gabriella began in a professional tone. "I have prepared all the necessary documents based on the information you provided. But before we continue, I must confirm. Is your decision final?" "Final and non-negotiable," I nodded. David fidgeted. "What decision? What are you even talking about?" "Dad, explain this." I looked silently at this 44-year-old man, trying to find the little boy who once ran to me shouting "Daddy." But that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger with a hard face, the same one who, a couple of hours ago, had punched me and called me a stinking old man. "I'll explain now," I said. "Let's start with the main thing." The lawyer pulled out the first document. The title of ownership for the house located at 14, Jardines Lane. "This very house we are in." David smiled with relief. "Well, finally," he exclaimed. "I thought you'd never pull the trigger. It's about time you transferred it to me." Gabriella turned a cold gaze toward him. "I think you misunderstand, Mr. Miller Jr. This is a confirmation of your father's ownership. The house belongs to Arthur Miller. It always has, and it does now." The smile slid off David's face. "What do you mean? Belongs?" he stammered. "You promised to sign it over 10 years ago. We had a deal. I promised, I confirmed. And I intended to do it. Dash. An inner feeling I couldn't explain. Now I know what it was. I was waiting. I wanted to see what kind of man you would become." David turned pale. His arms, crossed over his chest, tightened. "And what does that mean?" he asked in a low voice. "Now you've decided to punish me for what happened in the kitchen." "For what happened in the kitchen," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it? You hit your father, David. You called me a stinking old man. And your wife laughed." Carrie flinched but said nothing. Her eyes narrowed. Poorly concealed hatred was written in them. "I lost my temper," David hissed. "I was wrong, I admit it. But there's no need for this circus with lawyers over one fight." The lawyer coughed delicately. "If I may, I'll continue. We have much more to discuss." She laid 2 more documents on the bed. Titles of ownership for a condo on Central Street and an apartment on La Paz Avenue. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. Both properties also belong to Mr. Arthur Miller. The silence that followed those words was deafening. David froze, his face shifting from bewilderment to shock. Carrie opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound. What? David finally choked out. What apartments? Where did they come from? I folded my hands on my knees and spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. The first apartment your mother and I bought 30 years ago, when you were still in school. We saved for years. We wanted you to have a head start in life. The second I bought about 20 years ago. You've been renting both out all this time. The money went into a special account you knew nothing about. But why? David whispered. Why did you never tell me? Did you ever ask? I countered, and for the first time, bitterness cut through my voice. In the last 15 years, have you even once asked how I was doing? If I had enough for my medicine? If I needed anything? You were certain I was a burden, a penniless old man living on your mercy. That thought made you arrogant. You thought I had nowhere to go, that I would put up with anything because I had no choice. I paused and looked him straight in the eye. But I do have a choice, David. I always did. I just didn't want to use it because I believed family was above money and pride. I was wrong. Carrie finally found her voice and stepped forward, trembling with rage. This is some kind of mistake. She spat. Where would you get the money for 2 downtown apartments? You were just a simple engineer with a normal salary your whole life. I turned to her and gave a faint smile. A simple engineer, I repeated. Yes, I was an engineer. But I also held several patents for my inventions when the industry still paid well for ideas. I sold the licenses to several major companies. With that money, I bought property, and there's still plenty left. The lawyer pulled out a bank statement. The current balance of Mr. Miller's primary account, she read in a neutral tone, is approximately $530,000, plus a monthly rental income of about $4,300. Carrie turned so pale it looked as though she might faint. She grabbed David's arm, but he wasn't in much better shape. Nearly $500,000. He muttered. And 2 apartments. Dad, why did you live in this closet? Why did you put up with all of it? I rose slowly. I was still weak, but I stood straight, and a pride I had hidden for years appeared in my posture. Because I wanted to be near my family, I answered. Because after Sarah died, my old house felt too vast and empty. I thought I'd be better off near my son. I believed you loved me, David, and that it was just hard for you to show it. I looked for an excuse for every cruel word, every look of contempt. I was paying for. I paid for my own presence in this house, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I paid by doing the grocery shopping, the cleaning, and the cooking. I paid by being your servant just to feel like I belonged. But today, David, you made it clear that I don't. I looked at Gabriella. Show them the new papers. The attorney pulled out a fresh set of documents. Mr. Miller has instructed me to draft a formal eviction notice. David, Carrie, as of this moment, the verbal agreement of your residency in this house is terminated. Since the property is legally in Arthur's name, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. You can't do that. Carrie screamed, her face twisting in a way that no longer looked beautiful. This is our home. We have a life here. Our friends, our reputation in the neighborhood. It's my house, Carrie, I said firmly. The house you said I was lucky to live in. Well, now you're the ones who need luck. David looked as if he had been struck again, but this time by the truth. 30 days. Dad, where are we supposed to go? The market is crazy right now, interest rates are through the roof. We can't just find a place in a month. You have a Tesla, David. You have designer clothes and expensive dinners every weekend. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I replied. Besides, I'm not staying here. I'm moving into the condo on Central Street. It's smaller, easier to manage, and most importantly, it's mine. This house is going on the market immediately. The proceeds will go into a trust for my future medical expenses and to a charity for elder abuse victims. The silence that followed was heavy. The stinking old man they thought they could kick around was dismantling their world with a few strokes of a pen. "Wait," David said, his voice breaking. "You mentioned someone else. Someone who acted like a true father to me. What did you mean by that?" I looked at him with pity. "All those years ago, when you were struggling with your first business and someone invested $50,000 anonymously. Or when your student loans were suddenly forgiven by a private donor. That wasn't luck, David. And it wasn't some government program. It was me. I wanted you to succeed without feeling the weight of debt, and I didn't want you to feel beholden to me. I wanted your love to be earned, not bought. But it turns out, without the money, there was no love at all." David sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, he didn't look like a successful project manager. He looked like a small, lost boy. "I'm leaving now," I said, picking up my small suitcase which I had packed while waiting for the lawyer. "The keys to the Central Street condo, Gabriella?" "Right here, Mr. Miller," she said, handing them to me. I walked toward the door. As I passed David, I stopped for a second. "Hijo no eslk nace, hijo eslk quer," I whispered the old Spanish proverb my own grandfather used to say, "A son isn't just born, a son is the one who chooses to be one." You chose not to be one, David. And I finally choose to be more than just your victim. I walked out of the room, down the hallway, and out the front door. The Chicago wind was cold, but for the first time in 15 years, I could breathe perfectly. My asthma didn't bother me at all. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel, there are plenty more stories to come.